This is Tom Riehl, and you're listening to the Matt Balaker podcast.
Good day, fine people out there. And if you listen to this, you are a fine person. We come at you today from actually quite brisk Orange County, California. But today's guest has made Orange County a cooler and funnier place for decades. He's a non-graduate of any reputable culinary school. He's a performer, producer, and teacher. He recently launched Riehl Food, a cooking website and YouTube channel, and he currently produces Lass Your Aff Off, a monthly stand-up comedy show at the Z Playhouse in Mission Viejo. I've been there. I performed there. It's awesome. You got to check it out. Please join me in welcoming Tom Riehl to the program. How you doing, Tom?
I'm doing great, Matt. Thank you so much for having me. Always a pleasure to see you again, even if it's via the internet, but you're smiling as always.
Well, you know, when I'm around you, Tom, it's hard not to be happy because you focus on two areas that are very important to me. And if they're important to me, they should be important to the world. And that is comedy and cooking.
Two of the major things in my life. Yes, for sure.
How did you get, well, we'll start on the culinary route first. How did you get into cooking?
Well, I grew up in a small town in Pennsylvania, Easton, Pennsylvania, to be specific, known for Larry Holmes, a boxer, the Easton Assassin. He was from Easton. And so I grew up there, and the first job I had was working in a dinner house. I was probably 15 years old. My sister got me a job there as a dishwasher, and it kind of went from dishwasher to busboy, to waiter, to cook. And that was my first my first view into the cooking world. And at that particular time, I didn't really have a lot of other things going on. So I stayed with that and actually became a really good cook at a dinner house, cooking filet mignon, lobster, anything you could think of, at 16 years old.
Wait, so
and that was really the impetus for my whole, I think, the beginning of my love of cooking.
Wow. So in 1 year, you migrated up the corporate ladder, so to speak, and this Easton, Pennsylvania establishment. You went from washing dishes to cooking filet mignon. Like, how'd you ascend so quickly?
A lot of people quit in that time. They're really kind of in the restaurant business. When someone leaves, they just take the next person in line, kind of move you up, right? But I did have an interest, which, a lot of people, when they're that age, dishwashing is just kind of like the next stepping stone to go off to college and become a doctor. For me, I didn't really have any immediate plans, so I just kind of followed that path, and it just kind of turned into a thing where, there was not just myself, but there's probably 3 or 4 other guys who were like juniors and seniors in high school, which were cooking these really high-end meals for these people in this high-end restaurant. Had no idea that it was just a bunch of college kids or high school kids back there cooking their meals for them. And I got to tell you, out of all the years I've been involved in the restaurant and food industry, I probably learned the most in that very short period. It was probably about a 3-year span I worked there. I learned the most in that particular time, just working in that dinner house. All the things that I know now, I really still use now as an adult.
So, what are some of these important lessons that you learned at such a young age?
One thing I learned very early on is, like, if you're working in a dinner house and, say, for instance, someone ordered a filet mignon medium well, which kind of takes a little bit of time. If from the time maybe I shouldn't even be sharing this, but from the time you take it to the broiler to putting it on the plate, ready to serve to the restaurant, if it actually falls on the floor between the broiler and the plate, you got to quick pick it up and put it on the plate and move on, because you really don't have time to recook that damn thing.
It's part of the carryover process. It gives it its distinctive seasoning. So, yeah. Did you read, was it Anthony Bourdain's Kitchen Confidential?
I did not know.
Okay, well, I had a series of 15 questions or more that I was now the whole interview shot. No, but when it comes to Tom Riehl Confidential, you mentioned sometimes a filet mignon can fall. What are some other industry, I guess, inside tips, good or bad, that us civilian folk might not know?
Well, I think the biggest thing, the thing that I hear the most, and it's just not true. I might be an urban myth, but people assume that if you go out to a restaurant and you're not happy with your food, if you send it back, that food will immediately go into the kitchen, and the cook will immediately spit on it, sneeze on it, and completely do whatever he feels like doing because he is just so absolutely upset with you sending his food back. I've never seen that in all the years I've worked in the restaurant business. I've never seen one person, or myself even, to do anything like that. So if that's your fear of sending food back, please get over it.
Okay, well, now you just inspired a bunch of pain in the ass customers to send more food back. So God bless you, Tom.
Yeah, for sure.
So what are some of the big differences between cooking in a restaurant versus cooking at home?
Well, that's a good question. Probably the biggest thing is, I mean, you're not on any sort of a time schedule. In other words, when someone puts an order in and they expect to get their food in 5 minutes. At home, you kind of more relaxing, take your time, experiment with things, and do a little of this, do a little of that. You don't really have someone watching over you constantly. So it's more of a relaxing, more fun atmosphere when you're doing like any job. If you're doing something as a hobby, always a little bit more fun than if you're doing it as a job where you got to meet deadlines, you got to meet this, you got to do that really quickly. So probably that's the biggest thing.
That's so true. I mean, you have your personal autonomy. You don't have to be so consistent where if you made one dish this way last Thursday, you got to do it again and again. You can
and that's the thing too. It's like if you follow a recipe, most of the time it will come out similar or very close to being the same as it was, but not all the time.
Not all the time.
No.
So you're in Pennsylvania. You're a teenager. You're making these 4-star meals for fancy clientele. But I met you in California. So what's the story there, Tom? How did you leave?
A lot of years
in Pennsylvania, right? Yeah,
for sure. Well, that was probably let me see, probably about 1977. I moved to California. I was only 19 years old, and my sister, who was quite a bit older than me, decided she was going to move to California and wanted to know if I wanted to tag along for a couple weeks. So I said, sure, why not? So she came out here to California. We came out for a short vacation. It was January, actually probably right around this time here, but it was very, very warm. And leaving Pennsylvania, it was like 10, 20 below. And come out here, we go to Palm Springs, go to Disneyland, do all the tourist stuff. And I'm going, this is unbelievable. I can't believe it's January and the sun's out. It's like 80 degrees out. So we go back home. She decides she wants to move out to California. She wants to know if I wanted to come out with her. So I said, well, I'll give it a try. So I loaded up. She had her whole moving van of all her stuff. She had just gone through a divorce. So she really had nothing back in Pennsylvania at that time. So I got together my major belongings, which was a bed, a stereo, and my drum set. Okay. And I loaded on her moving truck.
3 most important things you can have.
3 major food groups. So I threw it on there, not expecting to stay here for probably more than a few weeks. I thought, okay, if it didn't work out, I'll just go home and leave my stuff there. It didn't really matter. Well, anyway, that was back in 1977, and it's now 2023, and I'm still here.
Congratulations.
So it was. There was obviously a lot of things that happened along the way. I worked in the cooking industry when I first came out here, and I had a lot of smaller jobs like that, and then that eventually led into comedy and yada 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 after that.
So where was your first place that you lived in California, Tom?
We came to Huntington Beach. Lived in Huntington Beach. Some friends of my sister's were living down there off of Beach and Adams, for those of you familiar with the Huntington Beach area. And their neighbors were going on a month cruise, and they needed someone to house sit for them. And so they wanted to know if my sister and I wanted to stay there for a month in this house and just house sit for them. So that's where we stayed when we first moved out here. And then after that was up, we went and got an apartment together in Huntington Beach, not far from there. And then I lived in Huntington Beach for probably 5 or 6 years after that.
So you moved from, Larry Holmesville to Surf City, USA.
Yeah.
Did you become a surfer?
No, you know what? Not really. No, I never really got into the whole surfing thing. I used to do a lot of body surfing, but one time I got caught in a riptide, scared the crap out of me, and that was it. I didn't even do that after that. It was the most scariest thing in my whole entire life, actually. If you've never been in a riptide before.
Oh, I've been. Yeah, I grew up in Carlsbad, so I've been in.
Are you a surfer?
Not a good one. I could get away with longboarding when I was much younger, boogie boarding, but I'm in spite, you might think I'm hyper graceful. I'm actually kind of uncoordinated and goofy. So balance sports are not generally my forte. Yeah. Although that's kind of changing over the years. I'm getting into skiing on my wife's behest. But I want to what are some of the biggest changes you've seen, whether it's Huntington or Southern California in general, in the decades since you moved out here, Tom?
What's changed in Southern California?
Obviously a lot's changed, but what's most noticeable to you?
That's a good question too. Probably just the. I know it's cliche to say, but I'm just so many people moving in. Things just still getting built up. Areas that when I first moved out here, which is 40 years ago, maybe even longer than that. Things that were just like open land are now built up with stuff. It's just filled with stuff. So probably that was the thing that I really can notice the most, is just how things have changed as far as population wise. But that seems to be an ongoing thing. I mean, it's never really decreased, I don't think. But for the most part, it seems to be, we've always been overpopulated, but to the point where, I'm noticing it now where I live down here in Mission Viejo as well.
Yeah, Irvine company's got to stay in business, Tom. So that doesn't happen by not building.
No, exactly.
So you and I met through stand-up, and you've performed, you've produced, you've taught. What are your earliest memories of comedy or stand-up?
Well, I got involved in stand-up probably when I first moved out here to Southern California. I was like, before I even got into performing, I was like always driving up to Hollywood to the Comedy Store just to check out comedy. I was just so into it, with the shows like Make Me Laugh and all the shows that were on back in the day. Even before I got into it, it was always something that I wanted to do, get into stand-up comedy. But like so many people, I always kind of like put it on the back burner. I was afraid to get up and do it, take that initial jump into it. So I was more of an audience member for many years after I moved here to Southern California. But then I ended up taking a comedy class down here in the area, and actually in Huntington Beach, and then just started going out and doing open mics, and then eventually getting booked on shows, producing shows. And it's as you know, it's one step. You just do one thing at a time, and no one's really going to go out and hire you to do a 20 or 30 minute set unless obviously you can do at least a tight 5 to begin with. So you got to start. There's no fast track to doing stand-up comedy, as you know. You just got to,
No, you have to get up. You have to have stage time. You have to crawl before you can walk. So you mentioned you would drive to the Comedy Store. In the 80s, like that was Sam Kinnison's home club. Bobcat Goldthwait, Joan Rivers, David Letterman, Jay Leno. I mean, some of the biggest names, not just in comedy but entertainment, sort of cut their teeth there. Oh, yeah. What are some of the acts that you remember, Tom?
I remember Gallagher. I remember Gallagher up there when he was really kind of unknown at that particular time when he's just starting out. And it's because the comedy store is a relatively small room, right? And he got up there and he said, he goes through his whole act and then he gets to the watermelon bit. And he goes, for those who haven't seen my act, you might want to step back a few rows because, I'm going to crush this watermelon with this mouth. He did a disclaimer before he actually went into the act, and no one knew who Gallagher was. So they're just sitting there, not even believing he was going to crack a watermelon with a mallet. And so anyway, he goes through his whole act. He gets to the mouth. He splats the watermelon, goes over like the first 3 or 4 rows at the Comedy Store. And everyone's like, what just happened? And but since, you got to understand this before everyone knew the whole watermelon deal. So it was quite a surprise to everyone that was actually there that night. Then after that, obviously, he blew up.
So you saw him before the Sledge-O-Matic was trademarked, I think, Tom. So
yes, pretty much so. Yeah.
Very nice.
So, but yeah, like you said, there were people. That was the thrill of it all, is going into the Comedy Store, and you never know who might just walk in that night. The Sam Kinnisons or the Seinfelds or the Bobcat Goldthwaits. I remember one time we were sitting there, a couple of friends of mine were sitting there, and someone said, "There's look who's sitting behind us." I turned around. It's like right behind us, Stevie Wonder was sitting there watching the show, right? And so anyway, it was like starstruck because I'd only been out here in California for probably a year or two at that point. It's like, I can't believe I'm sitting here, and Stevie Wonder. So anyway, we're kind of watching behind us. So finally he gets up with his handler, I guess, and they walk into the restroom. So my buddy and I are like, let's go to the bathroom, check it out. So we go to the bathroom, right? And here I am. It's like, I'm in this urinal and Stevie Wonder's in the urinal right next to me. And it's like, and I'm like a fanboy, at that point going, hey man, I just love your music. And thank you very much. And that was my first, I think, interaction with any sort of celebrity, and being, like you said, being from a small town of Pennsylvania, keeping that all in perspective, that was really a big deal for me.
It was shoulder to shoulder at the Comedy Store urinal. That's a beautiful scene. So you weren't just sharing piss pots with celebrities, Tom. You then, as you said, you took a class and then you started performing at open mics. What was that like?
Well, obviously I was a little bit younger than I am right now, and it was a thrill. I mean, it was really cool. Even at the time when the shows weren't, where there's only a couple of people in the audience, where it was just the idea of going out, and now I'm doing stand-up comedy. It was like a really big deal to go out and perform. And, as you know, you meet a lot of cool people along the way, you meet a lot of friends along the way, and friendships I still have to this day, from 30 years ago, which is pretty amazing, through stand-up comedy. But, even back then, you have those really killer shows, and then you have the shows the next day where you suck. And you're like, that's the hardest part to really wrap your head around. How could I do the same set on Thursday, and on Friday I do the same set, and it's completely different audience reactions?
Yeah, I mean, you can say the same thing, and it'll get a 180-degree different reaction depending on the audience or maybe your delivery. There's so many variables. Right. But I'm curious, Tom, like, you've been performing a long time. How has your comedy changed over the years?
Well, I think not for just me, but for anybody in stand-up comedy, it really has to be, you have to talk about things that are in your life at that time that are important to you. So obviously when I first started doing comedy, I was single. And then through time, I got married, and then I got divorced, and I got remarried again. So obviously your comedy has to change along the way. Your perspective of life changes along the way. So
you had these marriages and divorces just to add new material to your act? That's
really all I do it for. Yeah, it's just for comedy material, as we all do, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Why else would you do it?
Exactly. That's why we're here. But the thing is like, you can't, if say, for instance, you're doing material when you're single and then you get married, well, you can't keep doing the material about when you're single because it's just not, I mean, you can't pull it off because it has to be more or less true to what your life is about at that particular time. And then, when I teach comedy, I try to tell my students, it's like I could throw a topic out like relationships. Okay, everyone in the class would have a different perspective on relationships because they all look at it in a different way. Good, bad. Some are in relationships, some aren't. So that's what makes everybody's comedy unique is the way you approach a topic. So that's why everyone's slant on stand-up comedy is a little bit different because your life experiences are different in whatever subject you're talking about.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up, Tom, because inevitably when you do stand-up, people are going to give you suggestions, the proverbial, you should put that in your act. And I mean, on its face, I don't think that's a bad thing. A lot of times comedians work with the inner circle and people give suggestions, but I think what's important to point out is it only works if there's a personal connection.
That's what it's all about.
So what do you say when someone's like, this thing happened to me, you should put it in your act? What say you, Tom?
Well, I always listen because you just never know. There might be a nugget in there. And as an example, a friend of mine who's around my age, and he's one of those guys that says, here, you should use this for your act. But it really has nothing to do with anything that I'm talking about in my act. So I say, okay, well, this one time he threw something out to me, and I always kind of listen because you just never know. And this particular time, it actually made its way into my act. Out of probably 25 suggestions, this one thing really made it into my act. And I told him about that, and it was I can't remember exactly how he presented it to me, but he was telling me about how he was saying he was getting old. He must be getting old, and he wasn't trying to set the joke up. He was just telling me what happened to him. He goes, and he always starts this out with, maybe you can use this in your act, okay? Uh-huh. And so as I was just driving by, this. I was looking for a place, and I couldn't read the sign. The billboard was so far away, and I was looking for Circuit City, and I ended up pulling in the wrong spot because the billboard was on. My eyesight was bad, okay? And that was it. He was just, maybe he can do something with that. So I thought about it, and the joke ended up being that I'm getting older. I was driving down through Huntington Beach, and I saw a sign which I thought said Beachcomber Lounge, great food served by scantily clad surfer girls. And as they got closer, I realized what it actually said was Home Depot. So it was kind of an incarnation of what he told me about his eyesight, just a little bit reworked.
A little trickery. I like that. Yeah. So I've known a good number of people who've taken your classes, and they're really funny comedians, but they all speak highly of it. What inspired you to start teaching comedy?
I think what it was is that, you get to a point where, for me personally, I've worked with so many funny people over the years. Comics that, can just work circles around me. They put the time in, they write all the time. And to be perfectly honest, at this stage of the game, they're working way harder than I am at that. And I'm thinking, well, how can I kind of contribute to the whole comedy thing? Given the fact that, I may not ever be a headliner, on an ongoing basis, for many different reasons. But I wanted to give back somehow. And I thought, well, I know when I first was kind of looking around to get into comedy, you can hear pros and cons about comedy classes. A lot of comics will say, you don't need a class. No one can teach you how to be funny. Just go to an open mic, have a couple beers, and get up and talk about shit. Okay. Well, that works for some people. But I think there are some specific tools that can be taught, some things that can be learned to incorporate into a comedy set, whether you want to use them or not. is entirely up to you. But I think that there are things that you, knowing ahead of time going into a show, whether it's an open mic or a book show or your first or second time, some things that are helpful that will maybe at least kick you up a couple steps above everybody else, because we've all gone to open mics, and a lot of performers, we'll call them, will go up there not really with any material at all. They'll just go up there and go, I don't really have much to talk about. So what do you guys want to talk about? That bugs the crap out of me, quite honestly. It's like, so I would tell my students, go to an open mic. If you get 3 minutes, go up there and do 3 minutes of some material that you're working on, and then leave the stage, and that's it. Okay. But just don't get up there and go, what do you guys want to talk about?
I like that you say leave the stage too, because rarely are, especially at open mics, people are going to be upset when you do too little material. But exactly. The opposite is often true, where people just run the light and
that's the worst. I know for sure. So I thought along the way that, if I could kind of instill just a little stuff that I've learned, and not necessarily, it doesn't always have to do about, writing material and how to structure a joke, but just the things about going to open mics or things that are important. Like if you're going to get booked for a show, show up on time, pay attention to the light, the do's and don'ts of the club. Do they want clean? Do they want blue? What are you going to do when you get there? Just things so when you go out there, you're a little bit more prepared than if you were just kind of walking in off the street.
Right. Well, you're equipping people to be performers. And what are some of the common apprehensions or pitfalls that your students have when they come in, and how do you help coach them through these?
I think a lot of the students that come through that they want to do it really bad, but they just have this fear of getting up there on the stage. In fact, we had this one girl when I first started teaching years ago, and she, the first night of class, everyone was there. We had about 9 or 10 people in the class, and she was the only one not there on the first night. And then about 15 minutes later, she walks in and she said, I've been sitting out in my car. I'm scared to death to come in. And eventually, after, it's a 6-week class, and after 6 weeks, she had a killer, like a 6-minute set, went up there and absolutely killed. And as a matter of fact, I'm teaching a class right now, and I haven't seen her for probably 6 or 7 years. She actually just enrolled in the class I'm teaching right now. So she goes off and on with performing, but she came back for more. So one of the things that I think when they come into the class is they have a fear. And I think also most of the people that come into the class, I always ask them, why are you here? Do you want to be a stand-up comic? What is your goal? And a lot of them say, well, it's a bucket list item. I just wanted to go out and try it one time. Other ones will say, I want to see where it takes me. I thought I'd give it a try and just kind of ride the wave for however long that may last. And what they don't realize, I think, the ones that are there with the intent of, I'm just going to ride the wave and see where it takes me, they don't realize the amount of time that you need to put into coming up with an act and going out and doing the open mics and driving here and driving there. And that's the thing that I think is the most important in launching a comedy career is you need to go out and perform. Once you have an act, you need to go out and do it on a regular basis, if that's what you really what you want to do.
Mm-hmm. And aside from, the craft of it, like, setups and punchlines, what advice do you give to your students in terms of being able to advance in the comedy world?
I would say that, going back to what we originally talked about, is like, when you're writing material, it has to be something that really you feel strongly about. You have a passion about, whether you love it, whether you hate it, whether it infuriates you, whatever it is, it has to be something that you feel passionate about. Mm-hmm. And not only delivering it, because we all know when you write new material and it's funny, going out and doing it the first or second time, you really seem to get a lot of laughs because it's so new and you want to present to the audience. The problem comes is, like, after 6 or 8 weeks of doing that same material, or 6 months, trying to keep it fresh and making it feel like you had that passion behind it, like you did when you first wrote it. So that's why it's first and foremost, I think, important to have them write about things that are very important to them, and keep that passion alive, and try to remember back to when you wrote that first joke, and when you wrote it the first time, how you felt, and then try to keep that energy up when you go up and present it every time after that.
That's good advice, because the audience doesn't know if it's the first time you've said it or the 3,000th time. And
exactly,
it needs to be kind of conversational. Like one description maybe I'm just a blabbermouth, but one description of stand-up I like is it's a conversation with the audience where you're the only one talking.
Exactly.
And obviously there's crowd work, and it's not 100% true, but I think that conversational format is what makes live entertainment work. And I think it's hard to translate that. I mean, like I still enjoy watching some stand up on TV, and with a lot of the performers, that's the only way I can see them, especially a lot of the New York based performers. But for people out there, I'm on my soapbox a little bit. Comedy, in my opinion, is best served live. What do you say, Tom? And feel free to disagree.
No, I agree 100%. And I always tell my students, you have to take that mindset as like you're performing in your living room and all these people are here at your house. You have to be comfortable. It's conversational. You have to get up there. You have to be the most comfortable that way. And I think just with this last thing that Netflix did with Chris Rock, I mean, that was groundbreaking, believe it or not. I mean, a live comedy performance, which I don't know why it took so long to actually come up and do this. And whether you like it or you don't like it, I mean, I think that's the best way to enjoy it. I mean, he flubbed up a couple jokes, but that's what
I was so glad he did. Yeah, I
exactly.
mean, I've been doing it a long time, and even I will flub up 7 to 20 jokes a set. So seeing maybe the best ever do it, I mean, I enjoyed it more because of that, because I think I like the little bit of uncertainty when you're watching live entertainment. Like you don't know exactly what's going to happen, and who cares? It's like, it's not a monologue for a play. There's a spontaneous aspect of that, and to me, it just really enhanced the performance. Seeing to make a food analogy, it's like sometimes the best dishes don't have microgreens that are applied with tweezers. It can be a little messy, and it can be from the heart, and people enjoy it more.
Well, one of the things that getting back to the cooking thing real quickly, is like you were saying, is like one of the things that I remember early on watching, like, I mean, going back years and goes, there's a big guy on by the name of the Galloping Gourmet.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I remember him.
And basically he would, I think he was British, and he always drank a glass of wine, and probably 20 minutes into the show, he's completely wasted, But the thing is that was my inspiration as far as the cooking and the comedy, and he made it entertaining. But then you get fast forward onto like the Food Network and all these other channels where they'd spend all this time cooking, then they go into the oven, they come out with this perfect casserole. Okay. And the thing is like, it doesn't always happen that way in real life. So what I was doing when I first started doing my cooking shows is I would pull a recipe, and I wouldn't even cook it ahead of time in practice. I would just make it right there live on the show. And however it looked, that's pretty much how the recipe was. And that's really what happens in people's real life when they go to cook. It's like, you don't always pull this perfect specimen of food out of your oven, because things happen along the way. So same thing with comedy, same thing if you go to a concert, you go to a live concert, things could happen. But if you buy the group's DVD, it's completely highly edited, and everything, all the good stuff is cut out. So live is way better.
Live is way better. And you're not just saying this, Tom, you're living it. You're, one of the best producers in Southern California, and you've been producing a while. What's the story there?
Yeah, I think I really enjoy producing, because I like I like watching comedy, but I also, it's so important to me to have a place where comics can go and perform and have a good place, because we've all performed at places that maybe aren't so great. Okay. But we have to do it because we need a stage time. So I always try to create a venue that done as professional as I know how to do it. You know, when I say professional, I'm talking about like a microphone, some lights, some chairs for the audience, TVs turned off in the room, you know, just things, the basic things of doing comedy. So that's very, very important to me. And I think the comics appreciate that when they come in and do the shows that I produce, or I did a show with my good friend Ron Ruman down at the Community Riehl Playhouse for many, many years. But we both had that same philosophy where we want to produce a show that we ourselves would want to perform at, you know, and that's kind of always been like, that's where we set the bar.
And you've delivered. I've done their shows many times. I've sent people there, and I think the audience kind of feeds off your and Ron's energy. Like you're both very funny, charismatic, but you also care about details, and you don't have to get like hyper concerned about everything. But as you said, making sure there are no TVs on, making sure they say turn your cell phones off, and it goes such a long way.
Yeah.
So thank you for doing that. What are some of the I guess misconceptions about producing live comedy?
That anybody can do it. A lot of people go into producing a show, and but they kind of really, from the very beginning, they're not paying attention to the basics. And I actually taught a couple classes on producing a comedy show, just because I want more people to be able to go out there and produce a quality show where, you know, comics can go and perform and have people come back. Because I think that if, say, for instance, you're a producer of a comedy show, but it's a really crappy or not a really good comedy show, you'll have people that may be going out to that show, maybe have never been to a live comedy show before, and they see this, and they see not only, you know, the microphone's not working, there's the blender going on, whatever is going, they may never ever go back to a comedy show again because their experience that first time was so bad, which affects me and affects other people who are producing shows. So I think it's important that everyone go in that wants to produce a show and just really pay attention to some of the really basic things. And what I've told people is the first thing you want to do is, if you want to produce a show, the most important thing is the room. Okay. It seems so obvious, but look at the room. Okay. What's going on in that room when you go in? If you walk into a bar or a restaurant or a club or a theater, okay, do they have other entertainment going on that night? Is there a stage? Is there lights? Are there TVs all around all four walls? And look around and say to yourself, how would comedy fit into this? All right. And if there are TVs going on, which a lot of places there are TVs going on, you've got to understand that if you have your regular crowd of people going to this place and they're watching sports every night of the week, and all of a sudden now they're going to stop and go, okay, TV's off, we're doing comedy, shut up and listen. Okay. First of all, that's not going to go over well with anyone. So you got to really pay attention, first of all, to the room, and then everything trickles down after that, I think.
Well said. Yeah. I mean, I've produced too, and I think any performer should produce shows because it makes you appreciate things like that. And I've been at venues where I'm just there to have dinner, and if they have music or comedy, like I don't want it. So I mean, you gotta put yourself in the audience shoes. Many of your shows, and like maybe all of them, are clean, or I'll call it PG-13. Tom, what was that an active choice, or did it just sort of happen over time?
It actually just kind of happened over time, quite honestly, because my style of comedy, or the material I do, it's not, I wouldn't say it's squeaky clean, but at the same time, it's not blue in any stretch of the imagination. You know, we may drop I try to stay away from F-bombs myself, but I try to keep it relatively clean, but there may be a few words that slip out. But we started doing the show at the Community Riehl Playhouse, and for whatever reason, it seemed as though the audience we were getting was an older audience. Now, when I say older, I'm talking about average age of maybe 80 in the beginning. But it seems as though they seem to, we were just booking comics that were not necessarily clean, but they weren't blue either. And that seemed to be, it kind of just happened. So we try to stay away from, a lot of the F-bombs, a lot of the off-color comedy. But that's not to say I would book someone like that, but I feel the obligation to let the audience know ahead of time that this is what's going to happen. And that's the hardest thing, I think, that for me that's been is like people go, is this a clean show? And my intent is to say, yes, it is a clean show. But then, there's some comics that maybe I haven't worked with in 6 months or a year, and maybe they added a new joke that maybe is a little not exactly what I remember. And then the next day after the show, then I hear about it as to, well, you said this was clean. Well, to me, it's clean. To you, it might not be so clean. So I've never really been able to figure that one out yet, quite honestly. There's squeaky clean, and then there's everything else, I think.
Yeah, no, I've run into this with corporate shows because they'll say like, well, are you corporate clean? And I always ask them, how do you define it?
Exactly.
Because if I leave it up to myself, I don't see much benefit to doing that. But I think there's also, it kind of shows like, to make another cooking analogy, I love spicy food. Some people hate it. And I especially when I was younger, and there are plenty of comics that are filthy that I love, but I really enjoy Brian Regan or, I think it's not necessarily a bad thing to kind of build your show as a certain thing. Maybe 15 years ago, I would have disagreed with that. But personally, I've been able to get a lot more paid work and higher paid work when I do these kind of, I never say like corporate clean, but even when I do corporate shows, like clean-ish, what advice do you have for some of your students who are possibly younger, maybe have a little more piss and vinegar in them that say, like, I'm not going to compromise my artistic integrity? What's your response?
Well, that was one of the first questions I get asked a lot of times during the first night of class. It's like, what kind of material can we do? Can we swear? Can we do that? Because as we both know, being in stand-up comedy, comedy is probably the last frontier of like free speech, where you can get out and you can say whatever you want. At a regular job, you couldn't really go into work and say the things that we say on stage. And some of the topics I'm talking about in my comedy classes, I can't even, if someone knew the stuff that we talked about, and trying to find comedy in it. But what I tell them is, and this has changed over the years for me personally, because, and I feel as though everyone has a right to get up there and talk about whatever they want. Okay. That's what comedy is. But I tell them it's pretty much what you just said. It's like, if you want to go out and get paid and get more work, I would really try to work on the clean side. All right. Now, that's entirely up to you. And I said, and I'm always looking for comics to book in my shows, that I produce. But quite honestly, if you're dropping F-bombs and you're going here and you're going there, I probably won't be able to book you in my shows, even though I think that you're funny. Right now where I'm at is like, I won't be able to book you, although there are plenty of clubs out there where you can go and perform. But unfortunately, I probably won't be able to book you at the shows I'm doing at this particular time. But I want everyone to at least understand that they have the option to do whatever they want to do. Whether I agree with it or not, I try to tell them the way it is in the comedy world and where you're going to go to get the work. But they still have to be true to themselves and what they want to talk about.
Right. And I think generations ago, if someone was on Carson or Letterman, you have to adapt your act to the venue in this,
right.
And I actually really enjoy, it took me years, but enjoy that challenge. Like, what's the crux of my joke? And it can be maybe provocative or something that like would rub someone the wrong way, but how do I do it cleanly? And I think for certain people that can be, it can open the doors of creativity in a way that you wouldn't have without the restrictions.
Well, plus it requires work, and some people just don't want to put in the work. It's not easier just to not do the work and just get up and say whatever's on your mind at that particular time. So that's a personal decision you have to make. But I mean, we both know that if you want to get the better paying jobs in comedy, you have to be able to work, whether it's a cruise ship, whether it's a corporate event, whether it's a high-end comedy club. But it's always best. And I always tell the students, it's like, whether you're doing 5 minutes or a half an hour or whatever you're thinking, find out ahead of time from the club what they're looking for. Okay, don't go up there and just assume you can drop an F-bomb when maybe it's a completely clean club. So if they don't tell you what they're looking for, at least make sure you ask them ahead of time.
Do your homework. Ask them ahead of time. Very, very smart advice. So I'd love to talk with you more. We'll have to have you back, Tom. But I want to get an idea of what are you most proud of that you've done in your career?
To this point, I think that's I mean, a lot of things I'm proud of. I've done a lot in comedy. I've met a lot of very cool people. I've been able to do a lot of things that I obviously growing up in Pennsylvania, I never really thought I would have been able to do. It's such when I was younger that I've actually accomplished and done. Met a lot of really funny people, a lot of great friends over the years. With the cooking thing, that's really kind of turned into something that I'm proud of too. So I think at this point where I'm at right now, I'm doing probably about a 50-50 mix of stand-up and my cooking. And right now I'm really kind of on the road of pursuing the cooking thing, doing the live cooking events. I teach a lot of cooking classes, but I've incorporated my comedy in with the cooking, which is working out really good for me because I do a lot of live events, which really is a great tie-in between the stand-up comedy because I just love the whole thing of doing things live. Okay, I hate doing things on pre-recorded and then doing an edit. Although I know that's what you do here, but that's okay. This is completely different.
Yeah, we don't edit much. It costs too much and time consuming. So
takes too much effort. I understand.
Takes too much effort. Yeah, I don't want to do that.
But if I flip on like I'm doing right now, but if I'm teaching cooking for 90 minutes or 2 hours, and you get a lot of interaction where I can interact with people, or whether it's hosting a comedy show or producing a show or doing a set where it's all live, those are the things that I think of everything I've learned over the years, being able to do that and feel comfortable with working in front of a live audience, whether it's the cooking or the comedy or just being out in public. I think that's the one thing that I think getting into the stand-up comedy has really helped me in so many areas of my life of not having that fear to go out and just do stuff, So I enjoy that the most, I think.
You have to get past that fear. And whether it's cooking or comedy, Tom, what are you most optimistic about?
That someday I'll become famous. I think that I think I'm optimistic about, we get up every day and we look at the news, and it's kind of hard not to pay attention to what's on the news all the time because we're just bombarded with it. And sometimes it's hard to keep a positive attitude with what you're doing. I know for me personally, you get up and no matter what side of the political spectrum you're on, you have your views one way or another, and then you come bombarded, especially when you're on social media. But for us, myself, we have to promote ourselves. We have to let people know what we're doing. And so I can't get off of social media, even if I want to, because I need to let people know what's going on. But I'm optimistic about not just my journey, but everyone else's. Even if you're not getting the views you want on YouTube or the hits or the likes or the subscribers, you got to just stay with what you feel, what you love doing, whatever that may be, whether it's cooking, whether it's comedy, whether it's whatever you're doing. If you have that passion, it's so cliche to say, you got to love what you're doing and it's not work. I've heard that a million times with it, but it really is true that, find something that you love, and eventually, if you stick with it, you will rise above everyone else. But you just got to have that passion.
Amen. Well, it's not work when we're talking to Tom Riehl. Where can people out there who have, excess money, maybe some time, they want to watch you cook, they want to support you, where can we send them, Tom?
Well, first of all, you can send them to my my website, reelfood.com. That's spelled RIEHL, reelfood.com. All my recipes, all my YouTube links, all my live stuff I'm doing via YouTube is all there. We're doing stuff weekly. And then also comedyintheoc.com. That has all the latest and greatest shows we're doing here in South Orange County. My performances, our shows that we're doing throughout Orange County, everything that's going on. So between those two, you can always find out where Tom Riehl is and what Tom Riehl is doing.
And we'll link to those. Well, yeah. Tom Riehl, thank you for being on the show today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Matt. Appreciate it. And have a good time. We'll see you again.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Matt Balaker podcast. To learn more, please check out mattbalaker.com and encourage your friends to like, subscribe, and share. Really appreciate it.